Welcome back to the Writer's Hive. As always, I have Amber and Julie with me. This is a bi-weekly show where we attempt to demystify the writing and publishing process in order to create a writer's hive mind. So today we're talking about reading like a writer. So the questions that we are asking the group is, how do you read differently as a writer than an enjoyment reader? And what can you do while reading besides consuming good stories that makes you a better writer? Julie, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. So I definitely read different as a writer than I do an enjoyment reader. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I know that the connotation of being really serious, even in the booktube world, right? Like being a critical reader when you're reviewing and things like that. There's a lot of different ways that you can read. But I think that as a writer, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to read like a writer, which means that while I'm reading, I'm paying attention to all of the things that stand out to me. I never want to be a direct mimic of other authors, but I do want to take what I love about them and implement it into my writing. So I'm paying attention to the way that they craft dialogue, to the way that they build their worlds, to their sentence structures, to their cliffhanger endings on chapters. Like, what about that book made me want to keep turning the page? What about that book made me want to put it down and not really care if I picked it back up again? Those are all things that as a writer, I want to be paying extra close attention to, because I want to know what to and what not to do and what connects with me. I'll also look at the other reviews on books that I really, really love to see what didn't work for some people or what also worked for other people, and kind of get a baseline for really popular books of what people really loved. And then I can take notes on that and make sure that those are things that I'm paying attention to while I'm writing. I've already kind of established the way that I write best. And so at this point, I'm not making grand changes to my writing style. But while I'm editing or while I'm writing, I can keep in mind certain things for sure that I know I want to be doing or implementing more in my writing. So one of the things that I think you can do while you're reading that can be very beneficial to you in the long run is not necessarily note-taking, but writing reviews. And whether you post your reviews publicly, which is a whole other topic for authors, I think having them for yourself is really beneficial. So in my books, first of all, I tab and I annotate. So when a line really stands out to me, I annotate it. When a character development or plot development really stands out to me, I annotate it so that I can go back to each of my 5-star favorite books and see exactly what was incredibly impactful for me as a reader. And then I can take stock of all of that, compile it, and figure out exactly what stands out for me. And then in all of my books, I do a little rundown. So I have a personal star rating, but I also have stunning world building, magic and myth building. I have, ever-present focus on characters questioning, the system. I have all of these things that I really loved in the book that I can then go back to and be like, okay, these are the things that stood out at the end of the reading experience. And that applies for, all of my books. I can go back and I can look at them and say, okay, here's the exact pivotal moments where I was moved, where I cried, where I got angry, and then have notes on exactly what I loved about that. I loved the relationship. I loved the banter. I loved the dialogue. This part of it felt a little slow to me, so that I can implement those things in my own writing. So I'm still enjoying my books. I'm not reading to a point where I'm dissecting everything and not enjoying the reading experience. But I think that reading with an eye on style is really beneficial as a writer. So that's what I try to do.
So I feel like I read as a writer sometimes. I don't do it on every book. And I think that it's not necessarily tells me how good the book is, because all books have their merit and I enjoy most books that I read. It's just that how much does their writing suck me in to where I forget that I'm a writer and I just read it as a reader. So there's lots of books that do that. Mostly I get pulled into the really beautiful atmospheric type books and I forget that I'm a writer. Whereas if I'm reading like something that's contemporary or a horror or something like that, I'll sometimes say like, I could have changed that scene a little bit and made it more impactful. But then when I do that, I stop and think, and I think, well, why did they choose to write it like that? And why do I think that that would make it better? And then I kind of make notes for myself of, oh, I really like the way that sounded. What did they do to make it work that way? And I just remember that when I write going forward. I don't feel like I read as a writer that often. I do usually still read for enjoyment and just lose myself in other people's stories, which is great. But I think the best way to read for writing is just to read craft books and read, books about the craft, and more specifically books that are specific to what you want in your craft. So if you want to have romance that pops, read all of the like Romance for Dummies and read Romancing the Beat and all these things that you really understand how romance works, or there's specific ones out there for horror or for thrillers, etc., or just overall ones, whatever you feel like helps you. But as far as fiction, I don't read that much as a writer, not nearly as much as I think Julie does.
More recently, for me, at least like in the past year, I've read a lot of nonfiction. So that's really where I feel my strength is when I read like a writer. I'm not necessarily reading all craft books, but I am reading about business and things like that. I've been lacking in reading fiction. And prior to that, I really never made a point to write down anything or highlight or annotate or tab anything. I do have those books that really stick with me and specific ones that will inspire me. So I'll take, an atmospheric setting that really, that I really loved in one book, and I'll try, and once I feel that, I'm like, oh, I'd love to write a book that would have something like that in it. I do sometimes look at, it's more of things that I don't like. So like the nitpicky things that just the way that certain sentences are structured or certain dialogue, that is a way to show myself like, maybe, I would never do that. So I make sure to like keep that in the back of my mind. When it comes to nonfiction though, how I read, I tend to highlight and take notes a lot. And the way that I sort of implement, or the way that I input that information, is by outputting. So I will make a point to, if I read on my Kindle, I usually read nonfiction on my Kindle because it's so easy to export all of my notes into a document. And then I usually have, at least in the past, been using it for YouTube videos, for my research. And also the nonfiction book that I'm publishing later this year, it's similar to that. So I gather all the information and then I write about it. And I know a lot of people, they actually will do that with fiction as well. Like they'll take different parts of the book that they love and they will actually write it out or type it out to sort of get that feel of the cadence of a sentence or a paragraph or things like that. So that's how I am able to make myself a better writer, I think, and just in terms of the inputting. So I'm inputting information from nonfiction, or I'm inputting things that I love or I don't love about books by implementing that in my own writing, but not necessarily, word for word.
I agree. I didn't even think about nonfiction, but I do think that expanding your craft knowledge is important. And that kind of even spans further than that for me to webinars or masterclasses, things like that, just constantly growing and learning in that capacity. But I do think that there is a lot of value to the old adage that good writers read, and it's not always possible. I know that I did not read very much this past month just because of my own writing goals. And there's got to be some kind of balance and give and take everywhere. So a lot of my fiction reading went down this last month while I was working on book stuff, which is totally fine. But I do think that while reading, whether it's in the genre you're writing or in other genres, or I am not a lyrical, very prosy writer at all. but I love reading that kind of stuff. And I love reading. I do consider myself a very character-driven writer. So when I read character-driven writers, I often get left with that sense of like, oh my gosh, why do I bother? Like I read a Bachman and then I just want to crawl in a hole and give up because like I will never be him. But I do think that there is a lot to learn there. And while it's a little bit like dejecting at first, like I do not have the talent that man was born with and then has honed, like everybody starts at different levels. I will never be a Bachman, but I can still learn from the things that he does. And I can still, take little snippets of the way that he crafts really close communities and like a block or two houses and creates a whole world, there. And I do think that to a certain extent, figuring out what you love about the books that you're reading can help you be a better writer without, copycatting. It's just working into your own methods, the things that you love or the things that you would like to see more of.
Yeah, one other thing that I know that I've done before is I was struggling with if I had enough conflict within my plot, and I was trying to see like, do I need to add more? Do I need to take away some? Am I okay? I didn't know. So what I did was I picked a book that I loved in the similar genre that I felt had a perfect amount of like pages, perfect amount of conflict. It just flowed really well. And then I broke it down, how many conflicts they had, how many plot points and how many times it changed, just so I can see what they did. And I could understand like, oh yeah, I don't have enough conflict here. This is why I'm struggling to get the right amount of words, because there's just not enough happening. I have this small idea, I need to expand it. So sometimes, and I'm not using their formula or anything like that, just to kind of understand how they did it and why it worked for me. And that's kind of how I can know to go forward.
I think that is very cool how you did that. I've never done that with a book, but I think it's an excellent exercise to do, finding something very similar and not necessarily copying, as you said, but just getting that process, getting their plot. Yeah, I love that.
It feels very much to me like taking a similar storyline and going over their GMC, right? Like their goal, motivation, conflict, and like getting all of their beats and being like, oh, here's where almost a side by side of like where yours are, where theirs are, and where you need to like, change it up a little bit. It's a great exercise.
So our question of the episode is, how do you read differently as a writer than just an enjoyment reader? And what can you do, or what do you do while reading that makes you a better writer? So in 2 weeks, we will be on Julie's channel. So be sure to head down into the description box below and give us all a follow. And if you enjoyed this Writer's Hive episode, do give it a big thumbs up and also hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it so you know the next time I upload. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Really? Can you hear that? I'm filming a video.
Honk, honk, honk.